Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, addressing all aspects of the digital enterprise, inspiring connection without boundaries and creation without limits. Thank you for tuning in. Here are your hosts, Thom Singer and Craig Brown.
Hey there, and welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Thank you so much for coming along on the journey of this show that we designed to be a resource for those who work in and around PLM. The Digital Enterprise Society is a forum for the exchange of ideas surrounding the tools, processes, and practices used across the product lifecycle. To learn more, visit digitalenterprisesociety.org. My name is Thom Singer, and I have the honor to co-host this show. Usually, I co-host it with Craig Brown. Craig is an industry veteran and former PLM leader at General Motors. However, about once a month, I host a career development episode where I talk to an expert to help you think of ways to improve your career. So Craig, I miss you today. You're not here with me. However, I am joined by Jessica Pettitt. Now, Jessica is a diversity consultant and professional speaker who works with companies and individuals to help them really look at all the different things that sort of scare them in business. She is an expert when it comes to doing the most that you can with what you have now and on having difficult conversations that really matter in business. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Hey, Jessica, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you very much. There's nothing I like talking about more than conversations that matter and doing the best you can with what you got some of the time. Happy to be here.
So, Jessica, give us a little bit about your background. You started off in the education space, and then you became a diversity expert speaking to major corporations all over the world. So how did you make that transition, and how did you get into the world of diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Sure. So working on college campuses as a college administrator, not only from a diversity or identity-based development place, but also a crisis management place, really enabled me to kind of bridge the gap into associations, corporations, different organizations, so that I can be there for their strategic planning that includes diversity, equity, and inclusion, and or in response to any kind of crisis management, current events, or things that happen. All of that boils down to conversations that matter that give your average person some agita or heartburn.
Yeah, there's a lot of things in the business world people don't like to talk about. So let's look at that. Let's just start off. First of all, what is a conversation that matters?
I like to say the conversations that matter are the ones that you have in your draft folder of your email, or they're kind of the ones you think about on the drive home or in the shower, but you're not quite ready to have them, but they're still top of mind because you know you need to. Sometimes that's a coworker, a family member, sometimes it's your own children, but those skills will enable you to have better conversations that really include and embrace people, even if they're strangers at the grocery store. So the ones you need to have that you're not having, those are the ones that matter.
So a lot of people, especially in the workplace, take those conversations and just leave them in the file. They don't ever actually have to have them. So is this costing companies money if people aren't having the difficult conversations that they should be having?
Not only is it costing them money, it's costing actual productivity. It's actually one of the main reasons that people leave organizations. So it's a retention issue. And then word of mouth, it can become a recruitment issue. It can also become a customer loyalty issue because there's all different conversations in each one of those buckets, let alone what's going on at home when you're not zooming into work or actually coming into a meeting, when you're traveling, etc. We all experience things that make us uncomfortable. So if we can build up those skills, then we become comfortable with being uncomfortable, and it allows us to have conversations from our own strangers, family members, to that particular hard client, board member, teamwork, etc. So the loss of money is not even calculable because it's happening.
So what are the biggest conversations that you find that people are burying and putting a lid on top of that they really should be having in the workplace?
This podcast is not brought to you by your HR department. I always have to say that because a lot of times we talk about how like politics or religion or family or things like this are supposed to stay out of the workplace. But you spend more time with your coworkers. They know that you're getting a divorce before you do. They know you're an alcoholic before you admit it. So then how can we have conversations about those things when we also take current events off the table, politics? There's so many things that we kind of hide from because they're polarizing. But the reason why they're polarizing is because we're all hiding from the topic. So the best way to bring people together isn't to become unpolarized. It's to be able to have a conversation where you can listen and be responsible for the conversation. That will bring us all together.
How do you think that the corporate world got away from being able to have tough conversations? Has it always been this way, or has it gotten worse in recent years?
Well, the first word that came to mind was a word you're probably going to have to bleep. So it was chicken patooey is the edited version. We are chicken patooies, and we worry about our job. We worry about our performance. We worry about getting the sale or the client. We worry about looking like a competent parent or partner or spouse or friend. We worry that we're going to do the wrong thing. And that worry about doing the wrong thing pretty much guarantees that we will not only be doing the wrong thing, but we won't even be conscious of the fact that we just did the wrong thing. Whereas if we can actually take some responsibility for it, then we can become more conscious of what we are unconscious of and own up to the fact that we're not perfect or that we don't know everything instead of waiting for that day to come. I like to say trying is really scary, but trying to try is at least doing the right thing in the right general direction. And that is a momentum builder if we can try to try.
But we live in a world where cancel culture is top of mind for a lot of people. So I think people are even more scared to try if it involves something that, could be misinterpreted. So let's talk for a second about this whole phenomena of cancel culture. And is it something people need to be aware of in the workplace?
I think that it is important to be aware that we are able to hold people accountable for their behaviors as we have always done. And I say that because cancel culture is not necessarily new. What is new is that we are all carrying little hard drives around in our pockets, and we don't want to look like a bad person, so we can jump into a frenzy around a particular scenario now that we don't even know anything about. But it's almost like virtue signaling, so we get involved in the frenzy so that we don't look like a bad person. It is important to mention that cancel culture is actually calling attention to a lot of really bad behavior, and the bad things need to be held. You need to be held accountable and be responsible for those things. Most of the people who are scared of being canceled, one, may have a reason to be frightened, and so they need to be more thoughtful about what they're doing. But I also think it's important to mention that people who quote unquote get canceled, that's very different than actually like murdered or actual attempts at genocide. It's like suddenly becoming very unpopular because you did something without thinking. The antidote is probably to think about what you're doing.
All right, so let's talk about having better conversations in the workplace. So how do we even get started?
So I like to call these better connections. So the idea first, and I think it's important to mention that you cannot do this with every single person, every sentence, every conversation. That's exhausting, and we have like coffee to drink or dogs to walk or naps to take. So what you need to do is you need to build up the skills before you need them. So I usually recommend that on your own, possibly using like a drive-through window exchange as an example, you need to not have a conversation partner. The other person doesn't even know that you're doing this. But what you're going to do is you're going to decide in this interchange, I'm going to quote unquote elevate the connection with humanity. That's the goal. Not to be right, not to make them wrong, not to win or make them lose. But the idea is that what you want to do is elevate a connection to humanity. So again, some of you are already like, hard pass, Jess, not interested. Okay, so just sometimes every once in a while when you're never going to see the person again, just practice this. But when you decide that you're going to increase connection, maybe you're going to make the person smile or feel joy, or maybe you're going to smile or you're going to feel joy. That's what we mean, right? That's the outcome. Not being right, not winning, just like, that I feel better. So when you do that, you're not talking yet, but you're going to decide you're going to do it. What does doing it mean? Is it an email? Is it a text? Is it this drive-through exchange? You're going to set the structure for this with the goal of being a better connection. And then, still haven't talked, then you're going to listen to them as if they know something you don't. Usually that's the first place people are like, I'm out, hard pass, because we're not actually curious. If we ask someone a question, we usually don't even listen for the answer, or we already know the answer. The best example of this is, how's the weather? Well, you live here, so you already know the answer. So can you listen to them and find out how they are doing? Sometimes that's observing body language. Sometimes if it's an email or a text, it's paying attention to caps or punctuation or something. I'm a flaming extrovert, so I tend to listen like a dolphin. So I send out sonar, little words, little sentences, but I'm waiting for the feedback to come back so that I can have an idea of how they are doing. Once I know how they are doing, working back up the flow chart, this is the interchange where the goal is to have a better connection. And once I know how they're doing, then I can actually decide what it is I want to say and how I want to say that, so I can form a message with clarity of my intention of said message instead of just talking off the cuff. If you can do those 5 steps, now you're almost ready to start talking.
All right, so let's do a little role play here. Let's not go into the office with this. That might scare people a little bit too much. Let's take it to that drive-through, right? I'm picking up a bucket of chicken, and let's say that I'm working behind the drive-through counter, and you're picking up a bucket of chicken. So you want to elevate the interaction with another person. What are you going to do? So you're third car back from the microphone. What are you doing at this point?
Right. So excellent example. So if I get up, it's my turn to the microphone, and let's say I've been quarantining, and I haven't talked to another human being that I'm not married to or that is not some kind of canine mutt. So this is the first human interaction I have. If I jump onto that microphone and I'm like, oh God, I'm so excited. Thank you so much for having a sale on this bucket of chicken. I love fried chicken so much, blah, 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 blah. If I just start doing that, there's a very good chance that the person on the other side of the microphone will be like, what do you want? What's your order? Did you want pickles with that? Right? They're not listening to you because they didn't even give consent to have this long conversation. There's a long line, lady. What do you want? So what I might do first is allow the person at the walkthrough, Tom, this is your part, to say the welcoming greeting, tell me what the special is. Maybe I'll ask a question like, you mentioned a special that has ranch dressing. What is that again? But then now I've engaged the person, hopefully. So then do they say, yeah, it's just the new special. They're not interested in talking to me. That's the meaning I'm going to make out of paying attention to them. Doesn't mean I'm right, but all right, just cut to the chase. Or maybe they're like, oh my gosh, it's so good. I had it for lunch today. It's fantastic. And I'll be like, wow, that's amazing. Now I'm deciding what I'm going to say. And I've already made meaning out of how they're doing because they know how they're doing. So then maybe I've decided that they are pretty straightforward and they're not really interested in chatting. So then maybe I'll be as efficient as possible, right? I'll take a number 2 and I'm using a credit card. Thank you. That's still increasing connection because I responded to what they gave me and what I made meaning of. Maybe if it was you, Tom, you'd be chattier than that. So maybe I'd be like, ooh, that sounds real good. But maybe I have to get that net later. So tonight, I'm just going to get a bucket of chicken. That's the message that I did. But the key is that once I formed it and I'm clear of my intention, then you release the Kraken out into the world. And then this is where I lose everybody else, is that once I release whatever it is that I'm saying, sending, emailing, texting, whatever, then I am 100% responsible for that particular thing. And by being 100% responsible, I might have read the room wrong. So then the person I'm talking to may or may not have received it well, but I'm going to be far less defensive about it because I was 100% responsible before I said it in the first place.
All right, so let's move this into the workplace. Somebody who's listening has an issue at work that they need to talk to their boss about, and their boss isn't always easy to talk to, but he's not a jerk. Now what do? So they're listening to this and they're like, oh, I'm living that situation. I should have that conversation with my boss. And he's not really a jerk, but he is difficult. How do they do that?
Okay, so I wish I could say like, well, you wear your favorite shirt and then you go in, and it doesn't work that way, right? So these are skills that you have for you and your goals. So in this particular case, if your goal is to make your jerk boss go, oh my gosh, I'm such a jerk, this doesn't work there because you're trying to win or lose or be right or wrong, right? So maybe if you have something that you want to say, maybe you're not actually going to say that. Maybe you're actually going to have a conversation where you don't say hardly anything at all and you just listen to them and be curious about them. There's a possibility that could set them so out of whack. They'll be like, that person came in and listened to my entire fishing story with my granddaughters over the weekend, and they didn't like say anything. It could change their perception of how conversations with you go. Your goal here is to increase connection, not to win. So even just shutting up and listening and allowing someone to speak is better. Now, does that mean it's convenient for your calendar? No, it would have to be convenient for them. But your goal is about the connection, not being manipulative and using, these are not the droids you are looking for kind of skills. This is not about manipulation. It's about actually making a connection with someone. Your boss might not be a good starting place.
So how important then, what I'm hearing is part of the work to have these more difficult conversations that matter is that you need to be able to understand the other person. That's the word that comes into my mind, is sort of understanding them. So how important is it to understand them, and what tricks can we do to get to the point where we understand other people better?
Great question. And I would say I would add understanding them then. So a lot of times what happens, and I often use the language around leaving room for edits. But the idea here is that we make judgments and assumptions all the time. And so we have very well-crafted stories about our jerk boss. But there's a possibility that we're not accurate. The story that we have written has made us feel safe and prepared and how to deal with our jerk boss. And some of you are like, no, they're a jerk. Okay, sure, I'm sure they're a jerk. But it's important to understand that their life taught them that this is how they're supposed to show up, just like your life taught you that this is how you're supposed to show up, which is just different than that way. So then what you're going to do is notice the story that you have written. Makes you feel safe and prepared. You have a lot invested in that. Great. Then you're going to metaphorically print that story out, triple space with extra wide margins, and you're going to seek edits. You're actually going to leave room for edits intentionally, as you would if you were writing a first draft of a proposal or a book or something. So then by being curious enough to seek edits, you actually know those edits are going to make your story more accurate. Instead of leading with a 6.5 single space story that has no room for edits because you're not interested in edits. That's where curiosity, generosity really come in, to be able to engage in those conversations, even with that boss.
So people often prejudge other people. They judge them based on past experiences. They judge them based on their title. They judge them based on all of the demographics that make up a human being. How do we get past starting with these preconceived notions? How do we even learn to leave room for edits?
Most diversity people will tell you to never make judgments and assumptions. And I've tried that. And actually, I'm just such a habitual jerk. I make it like an hour or two before I get called out or I notice I've made a judgment and assumption. So I don't go that route. So I think the first step is really recognizing and taking responsibility for the patterns of the judgments and assumptions you already make. It's not making them, it's recognizing that you do. And then what do you do with the ones that you do? And once you can be responsible for what it is that you do with the judgments and assumptions that you do make, then you can keep the ones you want to keep. You can edit some, and you can also unlearn and relearn things when you actually have more information, because you're able to take responsibility for how you actually show up.
So that reminds me, I was having a conversation with someone about unconscious bias, and that, one of the things is that we all have biases. Even, we can't say that we don't, because we do. And so just by noticing and just by admitting that we do have these unconscious biases about a lot of things, it helps us get past them rather than trying to say, oh no, not me. I don't have that. So are we talking about that here?
We can be, but again, noticing that in this conversation, I guarantee you a listener is like, yeah, but how do I get them to do this? I can't make anybody do anything. So as dissatisfying as this is, I'm just going to have to pay attention to myself, which I don't want to do. Like I am kicking and screaming. I would rather do, well, no, I wouldn't rather exercise. There's a lot of things I'd rather do than actually be responsible for who and how I am in relationship to others, especially in ways I haven't noticed. Ugh, I don't want to do that, but that's the starting place.
All right. So what advice do you have for people who are now, 20 minutes into our podcast conversation and they're both thinking, yes, I have to have more of these conversations that matter in the workplace or maybe at home. And maybe they're a little bit confused because we've been talking about chicken, we've been talking about bias, and we've been talking about bosses. What do people need to take from what we've been saying here?
Well, first off, you got a bias about chicken, evidently, Tom, and we're going to have to talk about that.
I kind of want a bucket of chicken.
It is not in the food plan right now, Tom. I think that noticing what you're interested in and noticing what you're not interested in was a big turning point for me. And that I was so interested because of my ego of making other people wronger than me. My ego was also very excited that I wasn't as bad as other people, but this is not about external validation. This is about really recognizing who I am. So, my book is called Good Enough Now, not because I don't believe in exceptionalism or something, but it's because right now, with the skills that you currently have, I can do the best I can with what I've got some of the time. Now, I'll say that's slower. But that's the clearest thing. And you're responsible, just like I'm responsible, for the piece of this that makes me go, pass. What is that? And then lean into that and figure it out. So the first part is do the best you can. No, I'm a perfectionist. Okay, well, if you tried something that you're not good at, you're not going to be perfect at it. But can you do your best? Sure you can. Do the best you can. Second part, with what you got. Not when you make a certain amount of money, close a certain amount of deal, hire all the people that you need, get rid of Bob. No, with the tools that you currently have, can you operate? Spoiler alert, you are currently operating with the tools that you have. You're just not conscious of it. So all you have to do is become conscious of the unconscious. Do the best you can with what you already got. And then the last part is some of the time. This is not a opt-in, opt-out switch. I like to tell a story when I quit smoking. Those of you that smoke, you're going to have a nitpick for about 7 seconds. So hold someone's hand. But when I used to smoke, I got up to like 3 packs a day. And I would try and quit. And then I would all of a sudden be in the middle of a cigarette, like after lunch or something. And then somehow I unconsciously quitting. And then the next thing I know, I'd be full-time smoking again. Instead, why don't I just have like 3 cigarettes instead of 60 cigarettes and consider that quitting? That's great. That's 57 cigarettes I didn't have in that given day. Let's see if tomorrow I can get to 58. It's so much more motivating to do the best you can with what you got some of the time. That is good enough now.
So for people who need to have tough conversations in the workplace, they're not always going to go well, is what you're saying.
No. And you'll be responsible for the good ones, and you'll be responsible for the mediocre ones, and you'll be responsible for the bad ones. But you at least tried to try.
So is it better to try to have these conversations and let some of them be along the bumpy road than we were talking about in the beginning about just burying them and putting a lid on top?
Well, I do have a mortgage, so I encourage some degree of burying. But that's only so that I have job security. Outside of my job security, yes, you should probably try. And it might even be helpful if you have to say something to say, I'm going to try and have a conversation and I'm nervous about it. I'm really nervous about how this is going to go.
Is that something you can say to the other person is, hey, we have to talk about this and it makes me a little uncomfortable. It makes me a little nervous. Is that a fair way to start a conversation like this?
Sure. And the other person may be sick and tired of you failing at this. And so they may say, no. All right, great. Well, then you're going to have to figure it out. But the little monkeys in your brain are going to be like, no, I listened to the woman and she said I said this and it unlocks a magic password and then I will win this conversation. That is not what I said. But it's important to understand that just because you don't have the skills with this person doesn't mean you can't still work on the skills because they might work with someone else.
So it's messy dealing with people. So As we wrap up this interview, what do you wish everybody knew when it came to being able to have, these types of conversations and working through the messy, icky parts?
I actually think people enjoy the messy more. If you think about like the lives that are portrayed in filters and social media and stuff like that now, like there's parts of us that aspire to this. And then there's this critical part of us that's looking for the Photoshop fails. And wouldn't it just be lovely if we could just be messy? And sometimes messy has unintended impact, and sometimes messy is wrong. But most of the time, messy is real.
Well, Jessica Pettitt, thank you so much for joining us here on the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. If somebody wanted to find you, they're like, who is this woman? I need to know more about her. And what is her book, Good Enough Now? Where do they go?
You can go to goodenoughnow.com. And if you're feeling adventuresome with spelling, you can go to jesspettitt.com, because no one ever spells my last name right. But don't you fret. I bought all the different spellings.
And that's Jess, JessPettitt. You have a lot of T's in your name.
I do. I have a lot of T. 7 letters, 4 same.
Wow.
3 sets of doubles if you were counting.
That is a lot of letters. All right, Jessica Pettitt, thank you so much for joining here. And thank you to everybody who tuned in and listened. Please join us every single week for more thoughts, ideas, and information around your career in product lifecycle management. The Digital Enterprise Society, it is the place for the exchange of ideas surrounding digital manufacturing tools. Go check us out at digitalenterprisesociety.org.
You've been listening to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Learn more about what you heard here today at digitalenterprisesociety.org. Join us again next week for more connection without boundaries and creation without limits.